Hi everyone, it's Henry here, and in this video I'm going to be finishing off my March for Macragge project, which is painting up the majority of that Strikeforce Agastas box that Games Workshop sent us. I've done two previous videos in this little series, including the sort of concept and conversion kit bashing type video, and then I did a nice long tutorial on how I painted up the Brutalis Dreadnought. So in this video I'm going to go over how I've painted the rest of the box, and my thoughts on the project and things that I might take forwards into future projects that I do. So I hope you enjoy it. Let's paint. So one of the things that I'm often asked when I do these army painting videos or tutorials or whatever is, do you do the same thing on your vehicles that you do on your troops and vice versa? And by and large, yes, I do. Obviously the surfaces are different, the shapes are different, you're going to have different things you may be able to show. You know, you might have different weapons, you're probably going to have wheels or tracks on your vehicle that you'll be able to do something with that you wouldn't be able to do on an infantry model. So there's maybe different details, but how I'm approaching the main colour and how I'm choosing how to paint the rest of the model is almost always going to be exactly the same. But I had a really good response to leaving in the almost full pre-shade of the Dreadnought, so I thought I'd leave in basically the full real-time footage of pre-shading up one of the infantry models. As usual, I'm using Tamiya Flat White here, XF2. It's a solvent-based acrylic paint, so you need to use Tamiya's thinner with that, so that's X20A. And I've got a very, very dilute mix here, probably 4 or 5 drops of thinner for every 1 drop of paint. And hopefully you can see as I'm doing this why I like to use this white paint in particular. I can have it very, very thin, so as I build up the layers on the model, it goes from black through to grey, and then eventually up to pure white, where I want the very brightest highlights. And one thing, if you've done much airbrushing, or if you've done any airbrushing really, you'll know that one of the most frustrating parts can often be getting the consistency of the paint right, where either you go too thin and you go to spray the model and it spiders off everywhere and you lose control, or you go too thick, or the paint doesn't mix very well and you get splatters. And the splatters tends to be something you're going to get a lot with white paints. White pigment is particularly tricky to get on smooth. But I think the Tamiya does a fantastic job of it. Now I'm spraying here at nearly 30 psi, so between 25 and 30 psi. I'm using a Harder & Steenbeck Cult of Paint Infinity, so that's got a 0.4mm needle and nozzle in it. So a nice decent sized nozzle, so we're not getting any blockages or anything. But as you can see, we're able to have real fine control, certainly as much as I've ever needed when I'm doing any sort of airbrush painting. But because it's a good airbrush, I do have elements of control over the pressure by how much I depress the trigger. So it's not like I'm constantly spraying it at 30 psi or nothing. There is a bit of nuance in between. But you'll see I'm able to get really close up to the model, really dilute paint, and it's not spidering off everywhere. I'm maintaining all that control. And what it leaves me with is a lovely matte surface to then spray the rest of my paints over the top of. So it's going to cling to that matte surface really nicely. Just gives you a fantastic foundation to work off. Now with regards to lighting, as per usual, I tend to pick a light source from above and to one side of the model, and then I repeat the same for the back. This just allows us to create slightly more interesting miniatures. We start to introduce contrast of values, so light and dark, so highlights and shadows on the model. And what we can do here is we can light this model as if it's a scaled down version of this enormous great, walking superhuman tank thing, rather than just say a zenithal highlight, which would be just highlighting a small plastic object. So we can really help define some of those shapes that are on the model. Now I've gone for a more stark or more extreme pre-shade than I would often do. And again, this is deliberate. This whole project's been about, again, painting differently to how I would before. It's a different concept I've talked about in the previous videos, but it's also a case of using perhaps slightly different techniques, or using the same techniques in a slightly different way, or same materials in a slightly different way. But you can see overall the pre-shade of this miniature is going to take me, I don't know, less than 5 minutes, certainly. So in a normal sort of half-hour hobby session that you might be able to grab in the evening or something, you should be confident that you could pre-shade a tactical squad. And you see, as I build those layers up, we're really able to get a nice gradient from black through the greys through to the white. And it also helps us draw attention to where we want to draw attention on the model. Now, often on a marine model, that's going to be the head, the shoulders, the chest, that sort of area. So by making that area a little bit brighter than the rest of the model as well, just helps draw the eye in slightly. And it's never a bad thing to start off a little bit too bright. Don't try and be too subtle at this stage. We're going to be layering lots of paints over the top of this, so every single time we do that, it's going to dull this down. So we may as well start from something pretty full on to begin with. You see, I've just gone back in to the head area there, just felt it needed a couple more coats of that white just to make it super bright. A little bit more tweaking, I think, on the shoulder pads. And you'll notice that my airbrush is staying in more or less the same position the whole time, but what I do is move the model around a lot to allow myself access to different areas. The ever brilliant Citadel colour pots there, just making it a real joy to use. I used exactly the same colours that I did on the Dreadnought, so if you want the full sort of recipe list for that and blow by blow, you can go and check that out on a previous video. I'll link it up in here and in the description. But you can see I've painted, pre-shaded up all of the Marines now, and this is generally how I work when I'm doing an army project. Is I will certainly batch the colour in one go if I'm able to, just to get a bit of consistency. But I'm applying that contrast paint, which is the Ultramarines blue, and I'm giving it a thin coat all over, and generally I'm angling that model away from myself so that the first coat that goes on is going to make sure it goes up into all those nooks and crannies that often you can miss when you're airbrushing. And then you go back in and you try and darken them out, and you end up getting this slightly strange effect where the colour just doesn't work properly. I find if you start by painting in those areas, or at least ensuring they've got a layer or two on them before you then go around and spray the model as normal, as it were, you won't get that so much, and you'll just get a nice coat, even coat all over the model. So I do exactly the same little oil filtering that I did on the Dreadnought as well. We don't have such large panels, so it's not going to be quite as impactful and quite as cool. But as I've said in many videos, I love this technique. I find it really relaxing to do, and I think the main reason I enjoy doing it, coupling it with the airbrush, is you end up with, I think, a surface that doesn't necessarily look particularly airbrushed, but it looks interesting. And both the processes themselves, I don't think are particularly difficult. Airbrushing is simply a matter of learning a bit of control, consistency of paints, that sort of thing. And then this oil dot filtering again is just getting familiar with using the oils and things. There's no mastery required of either technique to do this, and end up with a really nice result. So again, I find it quite relaxing, which again is personally the reason I do personal projects, is to relax. I'm not necessarily doing it to improve my skill set. I'm not doing it to advance as a painter or anything like that. Sometimes you pick something and do it, but often if it's an army project like this, generally for me it's just got to be all about enjoyment and relaxing. Colouring in, I guess. I'm just trying to do my best at colouring in. Now I've added the decals, and one thing I didn't mention in the last video I did is I quite like to scratch the decals up physically with a blade here. So this is after the microsol has gone on and dried, but before I've applied the varnishes over them. Now for the heads, I went back to the Horus Heresy Black Book and had a look at what they'd done for those in there, and I love the way they do the eyes in this is, so I thought I'd have a go at doing the lenses a little bit like that. Please excuse my nails here. I got a load of that blue oil paint under them and I couldn't get it out for ages. But in this super close up, yeah, a bit sorry about that. But yeah, for the lenses, again, because I was wanting to do something different, I could eschew the whole idea of not putting red lenses on good guys. I didn't mind that. I thought red would look really good on these Ultras. I've gone in here with Mephiston red. It doesn't really matter, just pick a red that you like, a nice bright sort of primary red colour that covers okay. And basically I'm going to paint a thin red line along the bottom and then a red dot above it. I'm going to leave this footage in as my dog's come in to look at the worst part of the video here and gone back out again because it's not very impressive. Yeah, it's not very impressive. I completely muck this lenses up. But I thought I'd leave it in because it's going to happen to you. I painted 10 heads and I mucked up at least 3 of them. I had to go back in and redo. But I can still talk you through what I'm doing with it. So hopefully you can see there we've got a red line along the bottom and then that slightly more dense red dot above it. Then I'm going to go in with a nice bright orange. You could use something like Fire Dragon Bright, would work pretty well. This was a Chimera Colours orange. But anything has got decent coverage. And then I'm going in and highlighting the sort of centre of the line along the bottom and the centre of the dot above it. So you can see we're starting to get that similar effect that we were getting in those colour plates. And you're nearly always going to have to go in and do some tidy up with lenses, I find. So that's fine. So I'm not stressing about that from the start. If you're going in thinking you've got to do it perfect in one shot, that's way too much pressure. But just go in and know you're going to have to do a bit of tidying up, cleaning up. You'll be fine. Or you'll do what I've done here, where you go and attempt to tidy it up with a little bit of thin black paint and completely paint over the area that you just painted red and yellow, get really, really annoyed with yourself. And start all over again. But you can see his left lens is more or less how I wanted it. So I've tried to redo the right lens. So again, just repeating it, dot in the middle, and then line across the bottom. And all I can say with this is get yourself really comfortable. Lots of multiple points of contact. So whether that's forearms on the table or against your chest, cup your hands together. Just prevent as much movement as you can, just get comfortable. And with regards to consistency of the paint, I've always used a wet palette. You want it so that you very gently have to press the brush to get the paint to come off it, but you don't want it so thin that when your brush touches the model, or so loaded with paint that when your brush touches the model, it all just floods off. It's just a little bit of practice. But again, don't put pressure on yourself to nail it every time. This is a really important part of the miniature. The eyes. So I would put aside an entire hobby session just to do the lenses. I think that's absolutely fine. As you can see here, I've been trying to clean it up with black paint. I'm having a nightmare. It's just, yeah, it's a disaster. So throw it away. Look at one you've done that came out fairly well. That should, again, his left on there I think looks really nice. His right needs a little bit of cleaning up. And the cleaning up, which conveniently I'm now doing off camera, I've just noticed, it's just making sure we've got a little bit of black all the way around. So you have a little bit of separation between the blue armour and the red lenses themselves. And just that little bit of separation and definition will make a huge amount of difference. So once you're happy with it, you've been backwards and forwards a few times, I'm just going to go in and add a couple more edge highlights around the head area. I've done a fair bit on the models themselves, but I'll always do slightly lighter ones on the helmet around the face because just think it's the focal point, so it's worth doing. Now, the bases, had lots of nice comments about the base on the Dread. Is very, very simple. But I thought, well, why not? This project isn't exactly taxing, so no need to make incredibly complicated bases. But I felt the bases were quite in keeping with the theme of the project, which was this sort of stylized take on Marines, as it were. So I thought, right, bases will just be a bit sort of stylized. So I've just got some checker plate plastic card, glued it onto my bases, trimmed it up, and then I'll sand it down to make sure it's fairly even. I'm sure there's neater ways of doing this. I just don't know what they are. Probably measuring it a bit better and cutting it out with some scissors. But it's fine. Then once it's all primed, I'm going to give them a base coat of a dark brown. I'm using Rhinox Hide here. It really doesn't matter, but just a dark brown. Say very, very quick. Once that is dry, I'm going to pick the main colour, which is Hull Red, which is one of my absolute favourite colours. I really should do a bigger project with it once. I did some word bearers with it like 10 years ago and I really liked it. So maybe I'll have a look at doing something again with that. But again, these just blast it over. You can sort of use the fact that your airbrush gives you that circle when you spray against it. And then all I'm doing here is I've added a little bit of white into that red, and I'm just doing like an almost like quick spotlight type thing, just roughly in the middle of the base. Again, just to help nudge people's eyes towards where you want it. Once that's dry, I give the bases a good few coats of gloss varnish. This is just going to help keep the paint on that plasticard a bit better. But also, I'm going to apply a load of decals as well. To finish the bases off, I've just took some black paint on my palette, and I'm just dry brushing that over the top. And this, as you can see, just sort of picks out all the little, raised knobbly bits, and just dirties and grunges it up a little bit. And then for the last bit of detail, I take this metal pigment. Now I'm sure you could use like a rubber sculpting tool, clay shaper, or cotton bud or something like that, but my little finger is fine. Wipe it over. Lovely jubbly. You could run a pencil over this. It's what the military models would used to have done. They got a bit of graphite and just rubbed it over like that. I applied decals to all of the bases for the heavy intercessors because I felt they were a little bit plain as a model, because I've been very limited with my colours, a little bit plain. So I made sure I put some decals on all of their bases just to lively them up a little, whereas the what are these ones called? Desolators? The missile ones. There's a few more colours on them. They're a bit busier, so I didn't think they needed that on the bases. And then the final step is the burnt umber oil wash, which I did on the Dreadnought, but I've done it at this stage of the model because I want to wash a little bit of it onto the bases as well, just to help blend the model in a little. But as you can see here, it's not like I would normally do, where I'd go around all the panel lines and do this and that, just adding a little bit here and there, just because it makes it look a bit more interesting, particularly over the black parts of the model. And all those lovely bonding studs that seemed to go down well on the Dread. And here they are, all finished. So the project itself, March For Macragge completed it. That's really cool. I'm going to try and do a few more of these sort of self-contained month-long projects, and they've actually been really good fun. And to that end, let me know in the comments if there's anything you fancy. Would you like me to pick up a combat patrol box or something and paint my way through the box if there are 2 or 3 videos worth, I think, of interesting recipes and techniques and things like that, because it's quite fun painting up more than just one model. It's something I'd like to do, particularly with 10th edition approaching. Maybe we could pick a combat patrol box and work through it. Could be a laugh. But back to these guys. I honestly think it's mission accomplished. They're not like anything I've ever painted before. The style of them, I say, my inspiration was that artwork book, The Visions of Heresy, and that idea that basically they gave a load of artists a brief, many of whom it appeared didn't really know what a Space Marine was, and sort of just drew their interpretation of it. And they didn't feel either that they had to colour in or identify every single detail on the model and pick it out. And I didn't do that with these either. But what it's given me is something that altogether on a desk, so on a gaming table, I think looks brilliant. For the time and effort it's taken to do them, I'm really, really happy with how they come out. They're not as crisp as, say, an heavy metal style paint job. They're not as grungy and dingy as a grimdark style, paint job. They're not as realistic as that military modelling type of painting that I like to do. And also, I haven't just used or overused one product on them, sort of just gone for a gimmick with them. I think I'm really pleased with that. You know, they are painted, they're just done in a different way. And there's definitely a few bits and bobs I'm going to take from them into future projects. I'm becoming happier with metallics. The metallics I'm starting to do at the minute, I'm going to explore that, I think, a little bit further. Using a lighter brown. The burnt umber I've used from Abteilung is a lighter brown than the burnt umber I've traditionally used from Winsor Newton. And I actually think it works better for these gaming projects, just because it's that little bit brighter, it's that little bit more identifiable from 3 foot away. So yeah, let me know what you think. Let me know if you've enjoyed it. I've really appreciated the opportunity to go and do it. Normally this type of project we do over on our Patreon. You know, you've got projects over there. I mean, Andy's just finished this phenomenal 6-part series on that Glutos model that he recently won gold with over at Golden Demon. You know, they tend to be our personal projects over on Patreon rather than over here on YouTube. And I'm not saying we'll start bringing masterclass level stuff to YouTube all the time necessarily, but projects that are more than just one miniature, let me know if they're worth us doing a few more of, and if there are any in particular you'd like us to take a look at. I've got a nice little self-contained thing for this week's video. Apologies, this one's gone out a little bit late. I'm afraid I lost my voice last week, so I wasn't able to record. So I've been itching to get this one done. But you'll have another one out in a couple of days' time. So thanks as ever for your support. Means the world to us. Lets us keep doing what we're doing. Got any questions, pop them in the comments. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Like, subscribe if you're not already. Take care, and I'll see you next time. If you've liked any of the models in this video and you fancy having an army of them yourself, but perhaps you don't have the time or wherewithal to get it done, consider dropping us an email at commissions@cultofpaint.com, and maybe Ben can sort you out.